Hi, folks. It's time for my yearly re-record. I'm going to try to do this a little bit more often because my supporters deserve to be thanked, and I want to keep things more up to date going forward. First off, thank you for returning to the Whiskey Ring. If this is your first time here, or if you're a frequent listener, please take the moment to like and subscribe, rate and review wherever you found the podcast. If you have suggestions for how to make the podcast better, or guests or topics you'd like to hear, please reach out to me at david@whiskeymyweddingring.com or via Facebook or Instagram. Second, I want to thank my vintage level sponsors, those at the highest level who keep this podcast going. Truly, without these supporters, I would have had to stop doing this a long time ago. Thank you specifically to Don, to John and Jim, Bill and Connor, Steve, Jake and Bill, Trevor, Michael and Jesse, Jared, Brendan and Larry, Logan, Patrick and Andrew, Dustin, Wade and Gavin, Daniel, and Justin. Thank you all for supporting, listening, telling your friends about this podcast. Cannot stress enough how much you all make this possible to go forward. If you haven't yet joined the Patreon, please consider doing so at patreon.com/whiskeymyweddingring. You can support for as little as $5 a month, where you can have access to ad-free episodes, and will also have priority if a vintage spot becomes available. Those spots are strictly limited, so if a spot becomes available, you're going to want to be the first to know. Lastly, going forward, I am trying to be better about posting show notes for each episode on my website, whiskeymyweddingring.com. These show notes will have links to websites and socials for my guests, and will also have additional information not in the interview, including reviews and tasting notes whenever possible or relevant. Thank you everyone for listening, and I hope to have you back as a listener next week. Hey folks, welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. Today we're welcoming back a returning guest, but for a different distillery, a different producer. So I'm thrilled to welcome back Alex Castle. You may remember her from about a little over 2 years ago now, from the episode we did with her with Old Dominic, which turned out to be either the last or second to last interview you did while with Old Dominic. But today we have you on to talk about your not so new place anymore, Augusta Bourbon in Augusta, Kentucky. So, Alex, welcome back on.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Right. So, just to reintroduce you a little bit, do you want to give a brief reintroduction to who you are?
Yeah, sure. So, Alex Castle, Kentucky native, born and raised. That started in this industry about 18 years ago. I was having to figure out how old I am and doing the math. 18 years ago, I've done stints with what is now called Town Branch Bourbon, Wild Turkey, and then helped start up Old Dominic, where I spent 9 years crafting their 3 mash bills, their gin, their vodka, all of that. And then about 2 years ago, made my way back to Kentucky to join the Augusta team and get their facility up and running. So I'm sorry, I don't know if it's my end or yours, but I did not hear any of that.
Nope, that would be my end because I forgot to unmute myself.
There we go.
Sorry. So I was saying, right. So as you said, Kentucky born and bred, Kentucky raised. So you were in Memphis for 9 years. Back, not just in Kentucky, but in northern Kentucky, near where you grew up. So, you're within a drive to your in-laws, the family. So not that you dislike Tennessee or Memphis, but I imagine it's good to be home.
It is. I didn't take the Augusta job because it was home. I took it because it felt like the right fit, team, everything. But my husband and I very quickly realized how awesome it was to be back home.
Understandable. So when I think the first time that I was introduced to Augusta Bourbon was at Kentucky Bourbon Festival. I think it was Matt was there pouring. There was definitely the old Route 8 and the 10-year. I think he had a couple of bottles of a 13-year single barrel there at the time. But I was right after the 13 had launched, so not a lot of it.
Right.
But you had an interesting way to get through, from place to place, shall we say, the folks at Old Dominic found you via LinkedIn, and then here you happen to be next to Ryan Edwards at one of the co-founders of Augusta at a James B. Beam dinner.
Well, what's funny is yes and no. They were using a recruiter who reached out to me on LinkedIn. So that's actually two jobs that started on LinkedIn. And so I was talking to the recruiter when I also was heading to the Beam Institute and was attending a reception hosted by the Kentucky Distillers Association. And I was actually there with the executive director for the Tennessee Distillers Guild. So like I was working, and we all do introductions, and this guy who does not have his distillery on his name tag introduces himself and says Augusta Distillery, and I immediately went into panic mode. I'm like, oh, I wasn't supposed to meet you tonight. But it was perfect because it was a very casual, albeit unexpected, chance for he and I to just talk and kind of jive outside of a traditional interview setting.
And so in a couple of interviews that you've spoken about, both when you first joined Augusta, and since then, you've of course said nothing but positive things about both sides, about Old Dominic and about joining Augusta. Even at one point saying that when you left Old Dominic, the announcement was specifically unspecific about what your next move was going to be, so as to not like take away from Old Dominic and what you had done there. But in one of those interviews, you did say like you felt like it was time, and you'd been there for 9 years. Like you said, you started it up. You did the mash bills, and you did what a lot of people don't stick around to do anymore, which is you stuck around to get your own whiskey out at a notable age at that. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about both what made you feel like it was time to leave one behind, and also what else convinced you that, okay, I'm going to leave this behind, but my next move is going to definitely be this.
Yeah. So it felt like time at Old Dominic. One, because yes, I did get to release my baby, right? I got to see my first whiskey, the Tennessee whiskey, come out. And we did a huge launch for it. It spanned over the course of a year, and then even got to see my bourbon come out. But also, I think any job, it's a bit like a relationship. And if you're in a relationship long enough, you can grow apart. You start out on the same road, you start out with the same views, all that kind of stuff. And over time, you realize that whether it's you or your partner, you start to deviate and kind of shift. And that's kind of how it felt at Old Dominic. It had grown, of course. It'd been 9 years. I had grown to where it didn't feel like the right fit for me anymore. Maybe I wasn't the right fit for it. It was just time I think for both of us to move on and find a new thing, for them to figure out who they were and are without me, and then for me to figure out who I am without them. And then with Augusta, what made me say it was the right place was honestly meeting Ryan and meeting the team. It's as blindsided as I was meeting Ryan at the Beam conference. It was awesome because it meant I got to see him and see how he was. And then he even had the team at the Beam conference. So I got to interact with them too in a very informal environment, and realized how much I loved them, and I loved their vision. I loved their idea, their hunger, the fact that they were in this tiny little town. Because while I was at the Beam Institute or the Beam conference, I did drive out to Augusta to see the facility and, see that they were trying to make this little town be known and, have people want to come to it. And there was just something about that. I was like, I kind of want to be a part of that now. Plus, it's Kentucky bourbon. I didn't realize I wanted to make Kentucky bourbon that badly until suddenly it was staring me at the face. You're muted again.
I'll edit this.
I now
It's
know where the little mute symbol is, so I can see it.
yeah. So I'm doing it only because I'm recording at home and my daughter is running around. So uh, just in case. Sorry. So with Augusta too, I'm curious. Did you know any of the? Clearly, you recognized Ryan, but did you know anyone else who was working at the distillery before you uh, went to visit and met them?
No, they were all new faces to me. They, like so many other startup small distilleries, weren't really able to hire from the industry, right? They're just hiring whoever they can snatch up. So they were hiring brewers and that type of stuff. And so it came from a world I didn't know. So they were all fresh faces. But at this point, almost 2 years in, they're all very dear to me at this point.
And you've described yourself too as a city girl, but and Memphis, definitely fits definition of a city. A lot going on, and as you said, you're going now to a small town, 1,100 to 1,200 people. Um, Wild shift from Memphis. Um, was that also an attraction, that it was this, even though you were a self-described city girl, that it was a place to pull back on the throttle and slow down life a little bit?
Looking back, that 100% wasn't, what attracted us to it. But I think my husband and I both at first were a little nervous about how we would adjust, right? We both grew up in the city. Being in Memphis for 9 years, we got so used to the hustle and bustle and the pace that involves. I think we were both a little nervous about being in the country, not having things be super convenient. I have to go 45 minutes to go to a Target, whereas I used to drive 10 minutes and reach two different Targets. But once we got here, it was amazing how quickly we did adjust and we did adapt. And the slower pace has been healthy. It's been good. And what we thought would be inconvenient, having to drive X amount, to get places, we don't even think about it anymore. It's normal.
I don't know for myself if I could ever get used to that. I'm so spoiled with everything. But I understand when people, like, we visit family who are 20 minutes from the nearest road that has a light on it and all that. So I can do it for a couple of days, then I'm like, I need a city. But that's me. So with that, we will leave old Dominic behind and move on fully to Augusta Bourbon. So, and I am saying Augusta Bourbon for now. I know that's this distillery is Augusta Distillery. As of now, only bourbons. You do have a wheated bourbon that semi-recently came out. But for now, all bourbon. So that's why if someone's listening to this 5 years down the line and you have a rye, sorry.
Well, I can tell you right now, 5 years down the road from now, we will not have a rye.
All right, you heard it here. First thing I want to talk about is the idea of the brand. So it's bourbon uncompromised is the motto.
Yep.
Until very recently, I would say, until the small batch bourbon was released. And I don't have a date on when that was, but it's pretty recent, I think, right?
It was, we started bottling it in January 2026, and I think our first shipment went out maybe tail into January. So yeah, brand new.
Yeah, right. So brand new. So until that, since the brand was kicked off in 22, it was cast strength, single barrel, everything 8 years or older. And we'll get into the self-distilled things that are coming down the line too, but let's just start there of cast strength, single barrel, 8 years old. And that encompassed the Old Brut 8 and the 10-year, which were kind of your standard expressions that eventually would become regular, readily available.
Yep.
You also had a couple special releases of the 13-year, 15-year, and 17-year, increasingly rare as those numbers go up.
Yes.
So I I wanted to talk about the products that are out right now first, and then we'll get into the self distillate. So the stuff that's aged now is, of course, sourced. Been very open about
Yep.
that. I won't press the
Yep.
NDA on where it's from. I know there's been plenty of speculation. As far as I will go, I will say I'm pretty sure I agree with the speculation on some of those things, but that's as far as I'll go on the interview here. What I'm curious about to start with is the product that you have, the barrels that you've picked for a while, maybe as late as 2025. You were on an interview saying that you were asked the question, do you get to taste every barrel before you buy it? And you're like, no, like that's not the state of the industry right now. They're telling you what the barrels are available, and you either buy it on the site or someone else buys it.
If you ask for samples at a certain point, you were too late.
Right. Someone else is gonna sweep it out.
Yep.
It's as late as 25. Like I said, it's in the start of 26. We're now in Q2. Is there still that urgency?
I mean, I think most people are aware of the state of the industry, right? Um, so no, the urgency is not what it was even 6 months, definitely not a year ago. It's definitely cooled off to where we can, if we want samples, we can ask for samples. But we also we know our sources. We know the distilleries, and most of them we can purchase without too much fear or concern. But there definitely has been a shift to where we have a little bit more breathing room when we see barrels that we think we want.
And to your point, you said distilleries. There are multiple sources for the products, with mash bills ranging from 8 to 20% rye. Make of that what you will, bourbon hounds, as I know you will. Again, without pushing what those sources are, with the slowdown in the market, your increase in self-distillation, and wanting to have a continuous product line, at least of the 8 and 10, and now the wheated going forward, how do you structure that? Is it more about a contract with a broker who then has the sources at the distilleries, or do you have kind of a long-term, call it agreement, contract, whatever you will, that we're going to get X number of barrels from these particular sources?
Yeah, we do not have a long-term agreement. That probably would be amazing. But we do have a broker or two that we have a great relationships with. And they know what we like, what we prefer. And so when things do pop up, they typically reach out to us to see if we're interested in it. But we also have been smart over the last handful of years to purchase product again that we know we like, but at different ages. So we've bought as young as 1 or 2 year old, we've bought 4, we've bought 6, and then brought it to our rick house so we get to control the aging of all of those barrels. And so we actually have a pretty healthy supply to get us by for a while, really, on the younger stuff. Obviously, I'm going to have to wait to get to 13, 15, and 17. And then the new make, we started filling barrels September of 2024 and have been filling pretty much ever since. But our goal, and I always say goal because never say never, right? But our goal is to wait till those barrels hit 8 years. So we are still, call it 6.5 years away from us most likely bottling those first barrels.
And the initial mash bill, I know you're going to play with some mash bills, but the initial mash bill, 75-25?
25. Yes, you have to do that pause in the 20 to 5 because it's 20% rye, 5% malted barley. People think you say 25 rye and then they get confused.
Yes, I had that written down in my notes. Like, that doesn't add up right. It's like 100. Nope. So
the math
yes,
doesn't
75,
math.
20, but it doesn't math. And so, in my mind, you and Ryan and Matt have all said in interviews that you're going to have a wheated, which Now you have source, but also going to potentially make a wheated in-house, and you're going to have a high rye.
Yes.
Now, I think I might have a shifting definition of what high rye is. So, like, because to me, 20% is already getting to be a high rye. You know,
And for a long
it's not the
time.
35 or
Yeah.
36. Yeah, but
Yep.
it's definitely in the upper half at least. So, what do you, if you're starting at your base recipe of 75-25, what would you consider a high rye off of that?
So for both the high rye and the wheated, our goal, we haven't started producing them yet. We're going to do that this year. But the goal is to get the rye and the wheat into the 40s. We want to be in the 40s for those. And then so basically just barely bourbon, doing 51, 52%.
And then you're still going to keep like a 5% malted barley for
Yep,
a little bit of
just
enzyme, a little
enough.
bit of flavor.
Yep.
Yeah, because I know it's not enough to have to. You'd still have to add enzymes to make that work at that level, but you can get a lot of flavor from 5%. So,
yep, exactly.
All right. We've seen a couple of new mash bills coming out at 51, 52%. So with that high, super high rye mash bills, I'm curious to see what that comes out at. But as you said, you haven't started distilling yet, so I won't tease that there's some, white dog sample on the way. So with I know what I wanted to ask next. So with these products you have, how do you word this? I'm going to do more editing than usual in this episode. So in creating these new mash bills, starting with the 70-25, you're not looking to exactly mimic what you're sourcing, which, I mean, that would already be tough considering it's from multiple sources. Like, which source would you mimic?
Exactly.
But is it meant to be ideally a continuation of the flavor profile that's being presented in, let's say, the old Route 8 and the 10?
We're hoping to at least achieve what I like to think of as the same DNA. So hopefully you taste it and it's going to harken back to those. So we do typically like spice, hence the high rye, but also a lot of dessert forward, not a ton of floral. We don't do a lot of floral notes, but a lot of those really deep barrel sugar notes too. So yeah, we fully acknowledge we are not going to achieve what we currently put out because it is so many sources. Their rick houses are different than us. All of it's so different. There's no point in trying to copy it. But also beyond that, we're also a single barrel company. 98% of the stuff we ship out our door is single barrel. What are single barrels? They're unique. So I think we also have that to our advantage, that because we already strive for it to be unique, bottle to bottle, barrel to barrel, that we can hopefully make that transition from sourced to estate produced and really not miss a beat, not compromise anything.
When you were looking to join and then joining Augusta, the entire build out hadn't been completed yet. I think the like 95% of the piping was in, but you were still missing one of the stills, and the building itself had to be redesigned to fit the stills as well. Right. So this, I mean, I've only been able to look at pictures, but this looks like a beautifully designed space, but it clearly needed rehabilitation and this, what is it, a glass wall build out to fit these Vendome copper stills in there. So when you visited during the Beam conference or when you came on fully, what was your thought as you looked around with the setup? And I know you had some issues with the piping. What were your thoughts?
I thought it was beautiful. So we're fortunate to be the oldest building we are in, because it's multiple build outs, was built in 1904, and then each building afterwards, year after year. And then we do have new add-ons where the stills are. That's brand new. And I just remembered thinking how beautiful it was and how well done it was that they kept the old. They honored it. They respected it. You still see all of the old beams, the original steel beams are exposed. So you can actually see the name of the manufacturer, which happens to be Carnegie. So we have Carnegie Steel in our building, and we honor that. We want you to see that. So to see that, to see, they left basically the designed fermenters, probably not as efficient with the ratios, but they designed them to fit into a historic building that has limited headspace because they wanted to maintain this central raised window area that you could walk down as a tour. But then to be able to build on a brand new section where the stills are, and it feels seamless. It really all marries together. And so I was blown away at how they did it. And still every day I love walking through it because of the choices that were made along the way.
I think you said in one interview you can't hire anyone over 6 feet to do production because they'd just be hitting their head all day.
Oh, it's so bad. We have such low head clearances.
I was thinking like the building didn't. It's not a huge. I say building. I know, as you said, it's several together, but there's 18 fermenters in there, which is
Yes.
a lot, and it doesn't look like that big of a building on the outside. So you said there were some slight tweaks that had to be made to. You couldn't have the 15-foot tall fermenters that had a platform atop to look down into. You had to do, I guess, flatter ones in that. How have those tweaks to kind of what we think of as standard equipment affected your style of fermentation and production?
I mean, fortunately, so far, the fermentation really seems to be not super impacted, which is good. The biggest constraints we ran into, and still honestly fight to this day, are because of the different heights and elevation changes, but also the super tight constraints we have going from point A to point B, is we have undesirable piping. That's the best way to put it. From, like, if you're an engineer, you don't want 190s in one line of pipe. Well, guess what? We have 190s in one run of pipe. And that was after getting rid of 100. So, that's been the fun part about our trying to live in this existing building, was the engineering aspect of it. Is it had to be less than ideal.
And for people who may not remember, Alex has a chemical engineering degree. So she is coming at it as an engineer. It's not a turn of phrase. So
I kind of forgot a lot of my engineering until I got to Augusta.
You said
it came flooding.
It just came flooding back. Yeah.
Yep.
No, I had to mention the piping because that was something that kept coming up in interviews. It was like, yeah, the rest was fine, but the piping, I was like, this doesn't go there. But again, you had to work with what you have.
Yep.
Now, Augusta itself, like I said, it's a small town. So the oldest building you're in, it's 1904. And one of the founding families, was it Ryan's family that had, ties 200 years back to the town?
No, it's actually Lance Bates. He's one of our founders. And Lance has his family, the Bates family, over 200 years in Augusta. And originally they had a dairy company. And so they were basically, how he puts it is, they were making, custom dairy products, custom milk, I guess, to deliver to people in the county.
So that answers the question that always has to be asked of why there.
Yep.
Now the Augusta it's not so far outside of the Bourbon Triangle that you would expect a distillery to be there. But there's no record of a pre-Prohibition distillery in town. And you guys are the first ones there post-Prohibition. 2 hours from Louisville, I think, maybe 45 from Cincinnati. Like it's not as much as you say that you have to drive 45 minutes to get to a Target, it's not as isolated as some of the other places in Tennessee. Right. So I'm curious from, I guess, your experience both just growing up in around this area of Kentucky, but also your experience in the industry. Why do you think there might not have been a distillery nearby at some point in the past?
I don't know, because we are right on the river, and
right, even that too.
Yeah, it's something we talk about. The Ohio River, really the river system in this part of the country, was the original bourbon trail. How were you transporting barrels of whiskey? You were doing it on the rivers. How were you getting from town to town? You were doing it on the rivers. So I really have no idea why we wouldn't have had distilleries, because also in this area, because Cincinnati is big for it, huge Irish and Scottish settlements. They all settled in this area. What do? They make whiskey. I really have no idea why we really didn't have anything here. It's kind of blows my mind. I mean, I'm sure we had plenty of quote unquote distilleries that were operating without licenses.
Sure.
Right. Sure. We probably had the moonshiners, but yeah, it is interesting that this part of the state was so non-existent in the distilling industry.
I mean, the only thing that I can think of, and this just popped into my mind, was that the proximity to Cincinnati specifically might have been enough that the people controlling whiskey on the Ohio side of the river were just like, we've got this. And kind of how Whiskey Trust did it in Illinois, just said, don't touch this. This is
could have been.
Yeah, I'm curious. That's really all I got. But I also wanted to ask you, this is a unique question because God knows, Kentuckians, I love you, but you love to talk about water sources and how good the water is. And you found out the hard way, pun intended, the hard way, that the water is not always what you want. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about your water troubles here.
Gosh, yeah. Water in Augusta is so bad. It is some of the hardest water I think I've ever encountered. I will say, I don't mind the flavor of it, right? You go to Florida, it doesn't taste good, right? Most people agree with that.
It's sulfury. I don't know why.
Oh, it's awful. I don't even want to brush my teeth when I'm in Florida.
Yeah.
We're not talking that, okay? Augusta's not that. It still is drinkable, but it is so hard. To where I actually had a Yeti cup that I ended up throwing away because I wasn't being as good about really washing it, and it ended up with calcium buildup in it. But at the distillery, we were having, over the course of time, just our mashes weren't cooling. It was taking forever. We were adding 30 minutes. And suddenly what was an hour and a half cooling turned into a 3-hour cooling. And then our condensers on the stills, they kept getting hotter, and we had to keep opening the valve further and further. And we opened up a heat exchanger that had cooling water go through it. And it was just gunked up. I hadn't seen a heat exchanger this dirty. And it was because of the water. And so a lot of our processed water was going through crazy filtration. We have carbon filter tanks, we have RO, we have water softener. We do all of that for processed water. Didn't think we needed it on the water that doesn't actually come in contact with the product. So all of our cooling. And so all of that was city water. And before I knew it, I had such buildup in all of my pipes. It wasn't cooling anymore. The inside of my cooling tower had so much calcium chips, from the pipes, that it looked like a beach in the bottom of it, just like sand. To where we had to shut down and just do massive cleaning on all of the system. And then ultimately had to do a piping change to put everything on soft water. And this was less than a year of runtime.
This question is not meant to be glib, but like, what do you do to clean out that kind of pipe? Do you just run? Because I would think you'd run acid or something to dissolve the minerals,
Yep.
but at the same time, you don't want to corrode the copper or the metal that you're using.
So yes, so the condensers, we did have to be very careful, and we did reach out to Vendom to get their input on the exact chemical we should use to do the condensers, because that was copper. And yes, the more you do acid, caustic, whatever on copper, you are wearing it away. You are shaving years off of it. But fortunately, the rest of the system was either stainless or a type of PVC. And so it was a little more chemical resistant. So we could be a little more aggressive on those parts of the system. But yeah, it's just acid, a lot of acid just going through the system.
You mentioned earlier that you have. You mentioned a few things earlier that I'm going to get to, not in order here, but we'll try. So you've been distilling yourself for 18 months or so, a little over September 24. You also have a unique experience when you go to the distillery, which is, as you mentioned, you sometimes buy products that are younger than 8 years old, even though that's the goal. So people on the tours get to try 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 6-year-old, and the most surprising to me being low wines. So,
Yeah.
you know, I was trying to think about it today, and I'm like, I don't think I've ever tried low wines. Like, I've tried a single pass distillation, I guess, but not a low wine that's then going to be redistilled a second time. Plus the 246. So, why share the low wines, and then what does the 246 experience look like?
Yeah. So part of it is, distilleries are distilleries, right? For the most part, we are all doing the same thing. We're all mashing, we're all distilling. It's just, I choose a different temperature than you choose, kind of thing. And so when laying out your production tour, you're like, okay, these people doing Bourbon Trail, they've heard the production process. How do you differentiate? What is the thing we can offer that's different? And so for the production tour, one, it's a bourbon and chocolate pairing. So we like to entice people with the chocolate part of it. But with both of our tour experiences, the production tour and the thieving tour, our goal is always to educate you about the barrel and what it does, because we are a single barrel company. So the barrel and maturation is paramount to what we do. And we want you to understand that. And so in the production tour, that tasting, you do get low wine, high wine, and that's so you can kind of understand what a doubler does. What is the benefit of that little pot still that we use? But then we also want you to try those so that you can then taste, our 8-year, our 10-year, and really understand, like, oh, this is the starting product, this is the end product. Holy crap, that's what a barrel does. Because a lot of people I've encountered don't realize that 100% of the color comes from the barrel. That, it's debatable, but 75 to 85% of the flavor and aroma come from the barrel. And so to be able to show them that so they can experience it, that's what we're striving for. And then similarly with the 2, 4, and 6-year experience, that's our thieving experience. It's to show why we want 8 years. Basically, it's taste it at those stages and see the differences. It's not to say it's not good at 2. It's just to show you why we do go that long. But it's also a chance for us to show you a different mash bill, because typically one of those barrels is a wheated bourbon. And so it's a way to taste a rye bourbon against a wheated bourbon, to just help people understand why you choose the grains you choose.
So it's funny. I think you kind of just answered a question that popped into my mind, which was that the people are on the tour, on the thieving tour, and they're trying the 246, and they try the 8 and the 10 and what have you. I was thinking, would you, since you know what source the 8 and the 10 they're trying is from, would you try to do the 2, 4, and 6 from the same source to see the clearest through line? But you said sometimes you throw in the wheated barrel, so it sounds like that's not exactly the case.
It's not. And maybe long term, I would love that. Really long term, what I would love is in that room, you have a 2, a 4, and a 6 that we produced. And then you have an 8-year-old that we produced. And then you have a true 100% like viewpoint of what that barrel does, because it is the same source. It's the same everything, just at different stages. But not super practical or possible at the moment. Oh, it is what it is. But it still highlights for the guests what's happening in that barrel.
So in the 2 years that you've been there, and since the 18-ish months that you have been distilling, you've already hit, I think, over 10,000 barrels distilled. So not small. Like, still, I guess, in the craft realm, but upper craft realm we're talking
Yep.
at this point. So I really want to talk about your aging process, because you had some really interesting words about this, and I just want to ask you about it. So you being Augusta, built these 7-story rick houses, 2 of them at this point.
Yep, we have 2.
So you got these 2 7-story rick houses. I think you'll be able to hold like 75,000 barrels, something like that, between the 2.
Yep.
So, you're on your way, but you got a way to go. You were talking about as you're looking at your own product, using different barrels depending on where it's going to go in the warehouse, and also just learning about your rick houses of that something in the higher level, floor 7, might not make it that 8-year mark, because it might just either evaporate or over oak or what have you before it gets there. So far in the time that you've been there, if you're willing to share, what have been some of your findings about how your rick houses are working?
Well, so far, thankfully, I haven't had to put a barrel on the 7th floor that was mine, so that's good. So we do some contract storage, so that's how we moved on to rick house 2. But so far, it's been really fun, because I saw this in Old Dominic too. We sampled some barrels right around between 8-month and 12-month mark, and the first one we sampled, I think, was 8 months old. And it was just because we had someone with us doing media or something. And I just picked a random barrel to drill. And we picked it based on lighting and how it would look on camera. And so we picked one that was on the outside, so close to a window. And so it got a lot of sunlight. And I can tell you that barrel was fabulous. It was absolutely delicious at 8 months. And then we pulled at the 1-year mark from 2 or 3 other barrels that were in a completely different spot, like more aisle. So no sunlight. And they were still good. Like, I'm still happy at 1 year, but they were not as good as the one with the window. So I'm discovering I still prefer windows for aging, as I discovered when I was in Memphis. But yeah, so far, for the most part, most of our barrels are like floors 3 and 4. So we're in a really nice, pretty steady part of the warehouse. And since we didn't really fill the first barrels until tail end of summer 24, you got to think they so far really have only had 1 summer cycle. Now they fortunately have had 2 winter cycles. So I actually want to taste them here soon to see what they've done.
I remember you saying in Memphis that it was kind of a more consistent heat. There was a higher floor for the temperature swings that you would get, and different humidity too. So the point is even more prescient about, you actually do have a real summer and winter cycle where you are now, as opposed to in Memphis, where it was more like a summer and a warm winter kind of cycle.
100%. So that's also, it's being gone for 9 years. I kind of forgot what it was like to age in Kentucky. And I definitely forgot what it was like to age in a rick house. We were palletized. And so it's feel like I've had to just kind of relearn all of that all over again. But that's been fun.
And before I ask the next question, I just want to do one quick check on stats. What is your entry proof for what you're making?
So we are doing 120 proof at the moment. Again, there's ideas that we may toy with that a little bit as we go and figure out what floor needs what. Does one floor do better at 120? Does one floor do better at 110? So that experimentation will hopefully happen soon.
Gotcha. So the reason I preface that question with that question is because I finished the old Dominic that I had quite a while ago now, and I was not able to secure an Augusta product before the taping, so I had to kind of compromise a bit. And my compromise was I went with a Jack Daniels. You know, heritage to Tennessee, and but also, you know, large. I was trying to do something, but it had a point to it, which was that you were saying, like, you don't foresee these barrels that you're producing surviving well on the top floor for 8 years. And I mean, I would say for the most part with those 7, even 8, 9 story rick houses, like that's been the case. Once you get that high, you're either getting an oak bomb, nothing, or you occasionally will get some of those like super hazmats, and or just high proof nonsense. Now,
Yep.
Again, this is why I chose the Jack Daniels, just because the Coy Hill and the Tanyard Hill rise, like that stuff was up there for 8, 9, 10 years, got up to hazmat plus, let's call it. So for you, I guess, does that make you think like it could work for 8 years, but it's just so rare or so chancy that like it's not worth the risk to the product?
To me, it's probably not worth the risk, at least not for any significant number of barrels. Will we leave, especially in the early days, will we leave some up there just to see what happens to them? Probably. Just like I will probably leave barrels on the first floor where it's cool the entire time so they don't age very fast. Again, just to see what it does. But will the norm be to leave a barrel on the top floor or the bottom floor for solid 8 years? Probably not. Just because the risk of it not getting there in the time we need it to, or being where we need it to be at that time, it's probably not worth the risk.
And you do have this stated goal that at Augusta, everything that is brought to market, brought to retail, will be 8 years plus. I'll ask the obvious question with that. What happens if you end up with a barrel anywhere in the warehouse, in the rick house, that, let's say it's ready at 6. You taste it at 6 and it's like, this is exactly where it needs to be. What's the plan?
I mean, so fortunately, we do allow ourselves some freedom with distillery only releases. That's why we have the 2, the 4, and the 6, right? So you can find other age statements at the distillery. So we can give ourselves that leeway on that. Especially if you're talking about literally a barrel, there's no point in distributing that. But again, you touched on it earlier. We did start a single barrel and now we have a small batch. So we also we want to stand true to who we are, but we also never say never. We do fully acknowledge that circumstances change, the industry changes, all of that changes. And sometimes you got to kind of go with the flow.
As this industry has been changing, you in some ways you've started distilling as this plateau has begun. So has the state of the industry right now yet affected your production schedule or your projections for production? Or are you still young enough in that aspect that you can kind of go, like you said, go with the flow for now?
So we did actually scale back a little bit on our new make production, partly because when we run 24/7, that's 12 to 14,000 barrels a year. While I would love to work for a brand that actually needs to that or can sell 12,000 barrels a year, I don't think we are that. We all acknowledge like we don't really have models that show that we can move that kind of volume, at least not within our lifetime. So we were designed for contract distillation. And again, state of the industry, there's not a whole lot of that going on. So we did scale back to compensate for the fact that that's not really there. So we are producing what we need at this point, which is still great. We're able to produce really probably more than we need, without going crazy. And so that's where we are now. We're not full tilt, but we're still humming along.
And getting back to the different barrel types that you're using, I mean, you've mentioned a mix of trying out different chars, different toasts that might pair well with a different area of the rick house. Again, still early, so not asking for final results on this, but in general, I guess, what was your hypothesis and what have you seen so far?
Well, so unfortunately, I have not actually been able to start experimenting with other barrels yet. It's been a whirlwind of stuff, so we are still favoring the number 4 char, which is my go-to. I love the alligator char. And really, I do think that's probably what we'll go with most of the time. But I am curious. We just started doing warehouse 2, filling it. So I have a little bit of time, but I think as we fill it in and I have to start putting barrels on floor 5 and above, that's the opportunity to go with a lighter char and a heavier toast, I think. Because those are the ones that are going to hit quicker, right? They're gonna age a lot faster. So I think as we approach that point of the rick house, that's when we'll really start putting some different barrels away and seeing what they do.
Now, I'm going to ask this next one from the perspective of a whiskey nerd, which I know you are as well. Chemical engineering degree aside, I would still call you that with all due respect, of course. You mentioned in the warehouses, I keep saying warehouse and rickhouse interchangeably. I hope that's okay.
Absolutely.
In the rickhouses, you have sensors to track, temperature, humidity, the ambient conditions in which these barrels are aging, both your own and contract and what you've bought. So you posited in one interview, like you could go, if you wanted, as granular as like every barrel having some kind of measurement. And it made me think of a recent interview I did with Eric Wolf over at Stolen Wolf in Pennsylvania. Clearly wildly different scale than we're talking about. But he said he was thinking about, like, what if they did an RFID tag on each barrel and saw how is it aging, what's the grain, what, how is it, all that. Would you think about doing that? Like really getting that granular?
Absolutely. I don't know if we can at this point, but I would love to. Because part of it, the technology we're using is still kind of new. We're kind of still almost one of the guinea pigs for it. But, the idea that when someone picks a barrel, I can, almost do a printout that shows the temperature range over the life of that barrel, the humidity over the life of that barrel, and really let them know this is what you picked. And that way, going forward, if they pick another barrel, it's, hey, we really liked this. Is there another one with a similar cycle? And then hopefully you can help them find that. So yeah, I would love to get that granular. Is it coming up soon? Probably not, but I think that would be so much fun, and I think the consumer would get a lot out of it too.
I think back to, I mean, you had a stint at Wild Turkey, so you've gone from, and at Alltech, now known as Town Branch, so you've had experience at all different levels of production. And with Wild Turkey, I immediately thought back to these apocryphal stories of going to do barrel picks with Jimmy, mostly with Jimmy, honestly, but also I think later on with Eddie, where they'd pick a barrel in the warehouse and just be like, all right, do you like that one? Just look over, see a couple others, like, I think you're going to like this one too. And, they just kind of know that. And I get it. It's possible. Some has to be luck. Some's got to be the shiny barrel kind of thing. Which one's been rubbed off on enough? But I can see this idea, like you're saying, of, okay, this was in a similar area of the warehouse. This was similar mash bill. Char 4, all the things that you liked in this other one. All right, let's pull a few samples, see if you like that. We know it could be completely different because that's just how whiskey goes. But
Yep.
I think that could be really fun too, because you could get it's almost like a more macro version of when you find a barrel you like a barrel pick you like, you look for similar stats.
Yep.
I remember people going nuts for certain runs of Four Roses or certain floors and warehouses for Wild Turkey, and so I can see that kind of being the pull through to the next sale of a barrel, of being like, okay, same spot, you're going to like this one.
Yep. Or imagine, a brand winning world's best whiskey, and they have that data. They know, like if it was a single barrel, they have the data. They know where that barrel came from. They can show you the trends. How many people would then say, okay, I need a barrel with that same trend? How many barrels could you sell with that?
Right. And look, we appreciate the art of this industry, the science of it. At the end of the day, it is a business, and that's absolutely advantageous to the business of the distillery to sell more barrels. Particularly, I would argue, as you've built a brand around mostly single barrels. You said it's 98% of what goes out the door. So it's not like you can go from a batch to batch system that's going to be similar or nearly identical.
Right.
So I can see the promise in that, but I agree with you. I see the hesitations and the reasons why that's not necessarily practical. So I will check back with you then on when you get to play with different wood types, because I would love to see that. I have certain preconceived notions about what might work, like you were saying, the lower char, higher toast in certain areas. But as far as I know, no one's doing that on a large scale. Buffalo Trace might have done some of that in Warehouse X. Who knows?
Yeah. I'm sure they did plenty.
Right. But they have the time and the money. We'll give them their due, and then we'll do it again. So keeping on the products that are out, I'm particularly curious about this blend. So having the company being built on the single barrel identity for so long, what was the conversation like, and what was the profile goal in mind when it was put in front of you? Like, hey, we should do a small batch to add to our single barrels.
Yeah, so the conversation leading up to small batch was lengthy, to say the least, because it did at first feel like we were compromising, potentially, because it was no longer a single barrel. But we also felt like we had to talk about it because we did see the state of the industry probably is what made us pay attention to it more than it ever did. We were realizing we weren't hitting on premise. The lowest price point we were a year ago was $100 or a little over 100, depending on where the retail was, with over at 8. Most on-premise accounts, so restaurants, bars, are going to struggle to pick up a bottle at that price point. And if they do, it's just to add to their crazy bourbon collection. They're not putting it on a cocktail menu. They're not going to probably recommend it for a cocktail because what it would cost their customer. And so we were seeing that we were missing on premise. And then by extension, we were also missing an opportunity for people to be introduced to who we are. You know, if you're a brand that people don't know, you're like, who is Augusta? It's hard to take a chance on a known brand at that price point. And so we wanted to find a way to come up with that introductory product, get us to on premise, but also hopefully get us into people's homes that otherwise felt like we weren't worth the risk, right? And so that's where small batch came in. Was again, we have been smart with our purchases on barrels. So we have this inventory we can play with. What can we do to do that? And that's where small batch came in. Is it does allow us some consistency, because it's another thing we heard from bars was it's hard to put you on a cocktail menu when every bottle I get is different. And so try to come up with something that would be consistent, but approachable price point that they could justify putting us on the menu. And then also approachable price point. So people who were like, I don't know who the hell these people are, but I'll give them a shot because it's, you know, it's in my price range. And then hopefully they buy it, they love it. And then they're willing to step up to Old Route 8, Buckner's 10, Buckner's 13, because they've learned to trust us. They've learned to trust our product. So that's where the small batch came in. And we do still, I still feel like it's still true to the single barrel concept because of how I approach it. When we say small batch, we mean 3 to 6 barrels. That's it. When you do that, you are still honoring each individual barrel because there's not enough barrels to hide anything. So you are still honoring each barrel. You are still needing to look at each barrel and say, which ones play well together? Which ones are going to lift each other up and come together beautifully? And so we still are having to approach it just like we do our single barrels. And as far as the profile, really, it's still, at least for our gin SKU, still trying to follow what we typically are known for, which is a nice balance of spice with sweetness. But then what's fun is we do have some either distributors or customers who do custom batches. And so we have one up in New England. They love dessert forward. So anytime they want me to find them a barrel or something, they said, we need a dessert forward. We want chocolate. We want caramel. And so that's when I get to have some fun and I get to sit there and try to come up with their small batch and achieve that flavor profile for them. But yeah, so that's the small batch.
I want to phrase this question delicately. Was the profile and the idea dictated to you, or were you really told the idea and be like, okay, you run with it, and like you're head of production, you're masters that run with it?
I was trusted. They said, go for it. And I remember I felt a little rusty on coming up with batches. And so I remember we had this room where we do barrel picks and was just sitting in there and the table's just full of bottles from barrels. And I don't know, I did like 3 or 4 different combinations. And the first one I tasted, because I just do it based on individual barrel notes. I'm like, I think this will be good. Do the first one, I taste it. And I was like, oh my God, this is so good. And then I realized no one's in the room that I can tell. So I have no one to celebrate with. So I had to go find the president, Ryan. I'm like, hey, you look like you need some bourbon. Come taste this with me. And he tasted it. And he's like, okay, you did it. That's what we are doing. So yeah, I'm fortunate to have a team that does trust me, trust my palate, to where really I kind of got to make small batch my own in a way.
So the last question I have on current product, you've spoken about what you feel is the need to have more uniformity in your packaging. Now, I don't, you're not dealing with bottles from a consumer perspective that are way out there or really problematic. And I always point to like the Willet Pot Still bottle for this.
Oh, it's awful.
Right.
It's a beautiful bottle, but it's a nightmare of a bottle.
Right. It's like the cognac that comes in the Dragon the glass dragon. Like,
Yep.
it looks pretty, but where are you going to put this thing? Anyway, so, none of your bottles are crazy like that. But I understand it from the perspective of you want someone to look at it and recognize, okay, this is Augusta. This is a Buckner's expression. But it's recognizably Augusta. So, have you had more time to think about as a team, like where you want to go with that uniformity?
Yeah, we absolutely have. So one, the packaging for the small batch and the wheated bourbon was kind of our first step in developing that uniformity for future products. And that was making it not Buckner, not Old Route 8, but Augusta Distillery. And so that was kind of step one. And so again, never say never, but right now, our future distillate, all of that will be going in those bottles. But then also, if you've ever looked at our lineup, the Buckner's lineup, you have Buckner's 10, 13, 15, 17. 4 different age statements, 3 different packaging designs. All Buckner. Well, how are you supposed to know the 10 is related to the 15? Or even the 10 related to the 13? Then you take it a step further from an inventory standpoint, managing that many different bottles, 2 of which are screen printed, plus the corks, all that type of stuff. It's a nightmare, absolute nightmare. And so we are actually in the process now of moving all of the Buckner's lineup to the same bottle, same closure, same label design, to where it, one, will be easier to manage, but 2, I think it'll really help connect the dots for the consumer that all of these are related. They are still clearly Augusta, so hopefully you still tie them to the small batch and the wheated. But, it elevates the 10, lets people know, like, hey, don't sleep on this. If you like the 13, if you like the 15, you should get the 10 too. So yeah, we're starting that process. It is a slow process because the 10 and 13 were screen printed. So we are sitting on bottles that we have to get through. But we are moving that way. And honestly, it's an ongoing conversation as to how far we take it from there.
And again, as a consumer, I feel like I would allow for like the 13, 15, 17, if those 3 were consistent together, to be different than the others because they're rarer, they're coming out less frequently,
Yep.
higher price point. I can get that too, but I respect the fact that you want it to connect. You want someone to see them. I don't know if they'll all be on a shelf together. Some will probably be behind glass, but if they were all on a shelf together, you could see the through line for all of them. So I have 2 more questions for you. One that has nothing to do with whiskey that I'll leave to the end. But actually 3 more questions. Sorry. So the first one I have is the last one that has to do with what you're doing right now. When you were in Tennessee, because you were there for 9 years, you were starting up a distillery. You took a very active role in the Tennessee Distillers Guild, the craft scene that was there, a presidency at one point as well. So that seems like something you are clearly interested in, the advocacy, the group building, information sharing. And now that you are in Kentucky, with no disrespect to Tennessee, Kentucky is the big game for all of this. So I believe you're on the craft committee, right?
Yep.
So what do you want to pursue the same kind of advocacy and level of involvement in that kind of stuff that you did in Tennessee now that you're in Kentucky?
I would love to. So when I came to Augusta, the President Ryan was very active in his involvement with the Kentucky Distillers Association. And so we talked very openly. When I was interviewing, he's like, I handle the state. What do you think about handling federal? And I said, that sounds great, because I was involved with the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States and still am. So I put my efforts towards the federal level with Discus. He stays with KDA. I still follow it. But yeah, so I am actually still I guess I'm in the final year of being the chair of the Craft Advisory Council for Discus, which basically means that I get to advocate on behalf of and speak for craft distillers across the country, and actually get to sit at the board of directors table for Discus. So I get to sit at the table with all of the big boys.
Quite literally. I know there have been a lot of strides made, but I know it's still mostly boys' club at this point. So
It sounds terrible. I sit in the meetings, and every single time I always go around the table and count how many women are in the room. It's usually one hand.
right, exactly. Like I said, it's strides, but when you're coming from a long distance, even big strides can feel small at times. But we have to acknowledge strides are being made, thankfully.
Absolutely.
So with my last two questions, they're a little more esoteric. So one of them was you spoke about a trip that you took with your husband to Scotland, and you said you got to visit some distilleries that you hadn't seen before. It was the first time, and this was after being trained originally by a Scotsman. So of course I feel like Scotland is it's a pilgrimage site we've all got to go to at least once in the whiskey. I went before I was into whiskey, so I got to go back. I'm curious from your perspective of someone who's been very immersed in American whiskey for all these years. Are there other countries, areas of the world that you want to visit to see, what else is out there in the whiskey space outside of, let's say, central U.S. production?
Yeah, I mean, one, I'd love to go to Japan and see how they make whiskey, because the Japanese approach pretty much everything the same way, and it's with just absolute precision, consistency, protocol. Like, you want to talk about consistency, they're going to achieve it better than probably any of us. So I would love to see how they actually operate a distillery to do that. But then even going outside of whiskey, I honestly would love to go and see some rum distilleries. Not American rum. I want to go to the Caribbean. I want to go and see how they do it, because I think that would be so much fun. That and tequila. I've yet to do a tequila, and that's more so not the distillery, but the agave fields. I'd love to watch them harvest agave and process agave and all of that.
I hear you. Worth asking, when it comes to rum, are you funky or not funky?
So what's funny is I really don't drink a ton of rum, or at least I haven't gotten into it yet. Probably need to get my husband into it so I can then get into it. But probably funky. I feel like that's kind of the appeal of rum is, one, I'm not going to drink it that often anyway, so why not have a little bit of fun with it?
That's fair. Some people, the funk can be like peat. You need to work your way into it a little bit. Meanwhile,
well, I like peat, so
you're right. I happen to like the Hampton Estates that are like 1,000 grams esters per gram or whatever the measurement is. The stuff verging on the stuff that isn't actually drank. It's only used for confectionery and perfumes because it's so strong. But no, I do. That's somewhere that I want to visit too. There's so many whiskey places, of course, but yeah, to visit like a Hampden or an Appleton in Jamaica and see, or if I can get to Mauritius. I don't even know what the flight is like to Mauritius. It's like 3 flights probably.
Yes, and probably finishes with a boat.
Yes, or a plane you don't want to get into.
Yes.
So my last question for you, and this has absolutely nothing to do with whiskey. It's purely a personal interest question. You were asked by one of the more recent podcasts you were on, like, who is someone from history you would want to have dinner with, that are alive, or meet, and you said Henry VIII. So my wife is a massive Tudor era fan, loves the Six Wives, we've memorized the soundtrack to Six, seen it.
Yeah. Yep.
We did a whole trip to London focused on Tudor era. So I'd say, why Henry VIII? Like, where did your interest come from? And if you were one of his wives, which one do you think you would be?
Yeah. So my interest had, I don't know where it came from. I know when I was really little, I loved reading. So elementary school, came across complete works of William Shakespeare, and it was on sale at the local bookstore. My mom said, "Sure, I'll buy it for you." So I was like in
As
third
we
or
all do
fourth
in
grade
elementary
reading.
school. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, it's totally normal. So I was reading Shakespeare and just absolutely fell in love with London and England. My family has a lot of Scottish and Irish roots, and I've always felt close to that. So just kind of delving into it, and just always found him to be very fascinating. And of course, with the wives. Plus, I mean, it was a big part of English history, right? And then leads to Elizabeth and all of that. So I think that's really what pulled me into it. And if I was one of his wives, oh, geez. Shoot, which one was into art? That was Catherine, the second Catherine.
Oh,
No, Anne of Cleves. Anne of
Anne of
Cleves was
Cleves.
into art. Yes,
Yeah.
I would probably be Anne of Cleves. Yeah.
All right. That is going to be a lesser known, lesser chosen choice. And because I've asked this question to hundreds of people, but I like the choice. I respect that choice. And hey, you know what? Appropriate to your last name, you got a castle out of it, and you didn't have to really stay with Henry. So
Oh, I love it.
not a bad outcome. Awesome. Alex, thank you so much for coming back on. It's been a real pleasure talking to you again. Hang on with me for just a minute after we finish the recording. Thank you, everyone, for listening to another episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. When this episode goes live, as always, there will be show notes with information about the distillery, things that I didn't include in the interview, links where you can follow, like, and subscribe both the podcast and for Augusta Bourbon. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Like, rate, and subscribe. There we go. Wherever you listen to your podcast, let's keep that 5-star rating going on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And I'll see y'all next week. Let's see if it stops. This is so weird. It's not stopping. I'll cut this out, of course, but this is so weird. It's not stopping.
It's just being difficult. It's fine.
It's just being difficult. It's fine. So I'll end where I ended. I cut that all out. But yeah, it was great to talk to you again.
Absolutely. This was fun as always.
Yeah. I will, I'll let you know when this goes live. I will also be at the KBF this year. So
awesome.
Finally meet you in person.
Yes, I will be there. Typically, I only end up making it because it typically is the week of my wedding anniversary. So my husband and I are usually traveling, but this year is the 35th